Wholesome Appalachia, Episode 5, Sequoyah. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is not Poison Appalachia, it's Wholesome Appalachia. Once a month, we'll take a walk on the brighter side of Appalachia, because there's a lot of good things in Appalachia. I just am drawn to the darker side of things normally. But for the third Friday of every month, we'll have a bonus Wholesome Appalachia episode. Today's episode is on Sequoyah, who I don't think we ever really learned enough about, or at least I never did. Honestly, I don't feel like we learn enough about any Native American history, and it's a shame. But for today, at least, I'm talking about Sequoyah and the impact he had on the Cherokee Nation. Sequoyah introduced the first written Native American language to his people, so let's find out about him. Actually, he's pretty interesting, I think. But first, let's start with the Cherokee language, and then we'll move on to Sequoyah. Cherokee is an Iroquoian language, and the only southern Iroquoian language spoken today. Linguists believe that the Cherokee people migrated to the southeast from the Great Lakes about 3,000 years ago, bringing with them their language. Despite the 3,000-year geographic separation, the Cherokee language today still shows some similarities to the languages spoken around the Great Lakes, such as Mohawk, Onondaga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. In 1540, the Cherokee laid claim to 40,000 square miles in the southeastern part of what later became the United States. This area included parts of what is now known as the states of Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So most of Appalachia. Unlike most other Indians in the American Southeast at the start of the historic era, the Cherokee spoke an Iroquoian language, which I mentioned earlier. So some of the history flips here. Some people think that maybe the Iroquois came from the Cherokee instead of the Cherokee from the Iroquois. Unlike most other Indians in the American Southeast, at the start of the historic era, the Cherokee spoke an Iroquoian language. Since the Great Lakes region was the core of Iroquoian language speakers, scholars have theorized that the Cherokee migrated south from that region. However, some argue that the Iroquois migrated north from the southeast, with the Tuscarora breaking off from that group during the migration. Linguistic analysts show a relatively large difference between Cherokee and the northern Iroquoian languages, suggesting a split in the distant past. Glottochronology studies suggest the split occurred between about 1500 and 1800 BC. The ancient settlement of Kituwa on the Tuskegee River, formerly next to and now part of the Qualla boundary, which is a reservation of the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians, is often cited as the original Cherokee settlement in the southeast. Before the development of the Cherokee syllabary in the 1820s, which of course was Sequoyah, Cherokee was a spoken language only. So now we're back up to Sequoyah. There isn't a whole lot of information about Sequoyah's early life. Most of the sources are just kind of stories passed down from generations. And I got a lot of this from Wikipedia, but it matches up with other pages, so I think it's fairly accurate. Sequoyah was born in the Cherokee town of Tuskegee, Tennessee around 1778. Tuskegee, Tennessee now lies under Tellico Lake. As a little boy, Sequoyah spent his early years with his mother. In the people's matrilineal kinship system, children were considered born into their mother's family and clan. Her male relatives were most important to their upbringing. His name is believed to come from the Cherokee word Sequoyah, meaning hog. Sequoyah had a deformity in his leg. There's no history if he was born with it or if he acquired it through an injury. Some reports indicated that he may have had an injury in battle. Others say that it was caused by a hunting accident. The Cherokee Advocate said he was a victim of hydroarthritic trouble at the knee joint, commonly called white swelling. One doctor speculated that he had anascara, which is extreme swelling and edema. In any case, lameness prevented him from being a successful farmer or warrior. But according to a descendant of his, he was born with the name Sequoyah, there's a bird inside. After repeatedly failing to complete his farm duties, his name was changed to Sequoyah, there's a pig inside, which lead many to believe that he was born with a deformity in his leg. His mother, Wutah, is debated to be either the daughter, sister, or niece of a Cherokee chief. Historians believe her to be related to the chiefs who may have identified as the brothers Old Tassel and Doublehead. John Watts, also known as Young Tassel, was a nephew of the two chiefs, so it's likely that Wutah and Watts were related in some fashion. Due to native customs, Sequoyah learned everything from his mother, such as Cherokee language and his first job of a tradesman. Sources differ as to the identity of Sequoyah's father. Some say that Sequoyah's father was a Virginian fur trader from Swabia named Nathaniel Geist, or Guest. Others suggest that his father could have been an unlicensed German peddler named George Gist, who entered the Cherokee Nation in 1768, married, and fathered a child. Another source identified his father as Nathaniel Gist, son of Christopher Gist, who became a commissioned officer with the Continental Army, associated with George Washington during the American Revolution. Gist would have been of some social status and financial backing. Josiah Knott claimed he was the son of a Scotchman, and the Cherokee Phoenix reported in 1828 that Sequoyah's father was a half-blood and his grandfather a white man. So, nobody knows for sure. The New Georgia Encyclopedia presents another version of Sequoyah's origins from the history of Tell Them They Lied, the Sequoyah Myth by Traveler Bird, who claims to be a Sequoyah descendant. Bird says that Sequoyah was a full-blooded Cherokee who always opposed the submission and assimilation of his people into the white man's culture. The encyclopedia noted that Bird presented no documentation of his assertions, but his account has gained some credibility in the academic circles. In any case, his father was absent before Sequoyah was born. Various explanations have been proposed, but the reason is unknown. Wu-Ted did not marry afterwards, Sequoyah had no siblings, and his mother raised him alone. According to Davis, Sequoyah never went to school and never learned English. He and Wu-Ted spoke only Cherokee. As a youth, he spent much of his time tending cattle and working in their garden while his mother ran a trading post. Sequoyah was known to be a polymath. A polymath is an individual whose knowledge spans many different subjects, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. Despite his lack of schooling, Sequoyah displayed much natural intelligence. As a child, he had devised and built milk troughs and skimmers for the dairy house that he had constructed. As he grew older and came in contact with more white men, he learned how to make jewelry. He became a noted silversmith, creating various items from the silver coins that trappers and traders carried. He never signed his pieces, though, so there's none that can be possibly identified as his. Sequoyah was monolingual. He spoke only his mother tongue, Cherokee, and thus did not know how to read or write in any language. Despite this, he had an intuitive grasp on the function and significance written communication could assume among people who had mastered the skill. Sequoyah may have taken over his mother's trading post after her death, which Davis claimed occurred about the end of the 18th century. His store became an informal meeting place for Cherokee men to socialize, especially drink whiskey. Sequoyah developed a great fondness for alcohol himself and soon spent much of his time drunk. After a few months, he was rarely seen sober, neglecting his farm and trading business and spending his money buying liquor by the keg. Eventually, he took up new interests. He began to draw and he took up blacksmithing so he could repair the iron farm implements he had recently been introduced to the area by traders. Self-taught as usual, he made his own tools, forge, and bellows. He was soon doing a good business, either repairing items or selling items that he created himself. His spurs and bridle bits were in great demand because he liked to decorate them with silver. Although he maintained his store, he both stopped drinking and stopped selling alcohol. As Sequoyah grew in the foothills of Virginia and the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, he was exposed to the English language, became literate with it. Later on, he moved to Alabama and joined the United States Army for only 60 days, fighting the Battle of Horseshoe Bend under the command of General Andrew Jackson. In the War of 1812. Here, the Cherokee Regiment helped defeat the British-led Creek Red Sticks. Over the course of those 60 days, Sequoyah and his Cherokee friends grew frustrated with having to miss out on some of the benefits the white soldiers had, including writing letters to home and being able to read military orders. Cherokee oral tradition suggests that Sequoyah first became fascinated with the ability of whites to communicate by making marks on paper while recuperating from a hunting accident in 1809. During this period of contemplation and study, he became convinced that these talking leaves, as they were called by the many Native Americans, were the key to some of the power of whites and must become a critical component in the future progress and success of the Cherokees. Settling back into Cherokee way of life, Sequoyah found himself dealing in fur trading, silversmithing, and blacksmithing. Cash was the primary currency of the day, and if no cash was available, farm goods provided an adequate substitute. In instances where customers would not pay Sequoyah, he would have to remember it somehow. Being illiterate, he devised a system of drawing a portrait of what the person looked like and what work he performed for them. This personal style of hieroglyphics worked for Sequoyah, and these drawings would later result in him creating his own numbering system, which covered numbers 1 through 20. After reaching the number 20, the system jumped by tens and then hundreds. The numbering system became an even better source of keeping who owed what. By creating this numbering system, Sequoyah came to the conclusion that if he made up a numbering system, then he could also create a much-needed writing system for the Cherokee. Sequoyah became further convinced the necessity of literacy for his people during service as a soldier on the side of the United States in World War the War of 1812 and the Creek War of 1813-14. He and other Cherokee soldiers were unable to write letters home, read military orders, or make diaries and journals of events. After those experiences, he began in earnest to create a Cherokee written language. Sequoyah determined that a system for writing was critical for his people. He would spend the next 10 years of his life experimenting with ways to capture the Cherokee language. He started using pictographs with an image or graphic of each word, but realized very quickly that it was too unwieldy. When that didn't work, he moved on to a phonetic system, matching symbols to spoken Cherokee, breaking up each word into its basic sounds. His desire to create a language for his people became all-consuming. In fact, several sources talk about how his wife, Sally Waters, burned his work. His first approach was to draw a visual symbol for every word in the language, a logographic or pictographic approach, which I mentioned earlier, and before long he realized the task would be overwhelming. So he began listening carefully to the Cherokee speech, studying the patterns and sounds that formed words. He heard vowels and consonants and discerned many variations, finally isolating about 85 distinct syllables. He completed the syllabary by assigning each word a symbol, using a printed Christian Bible for examples of how letters could be shaped. By this point in time, Sequoyah and many of the Cherokee had been dispossessed of their lands around Echota, and he was now living in Willstown, Alabama. It was there that Sequoyah finally succeeded in drawing the new writing system. Written Cherokee would be the first written Sibyllic form of a Native American language. What makes this such an impressive feat is that he never learned how to read or write at all. He created written language from scratch. The spoken Cherokee language consisted of the combination of common sounds. Sequoyah quickly realized this and began grouping sounds together and giving each one a symbol, which I kind of mentioned earlier. The end result of his efforts were 86 common sounds, each having its own symbol. Putting the symbols together, they formed words and phrases. This system allowed the Cherokee language to be transferred to speech onto paper. Sequoyah stopped here, though, only developing a syllabary. He did not break the language down further into an alphabet. And I keep talking about syllabaries. So what the heck is a syllabary? In the linguistic study of written languages, a syllabary is a set of written symbols that represent the syllables or morae which make up words. Languages that use syllabic writing include Japanese, Cherokee, Vai, and the Yi languages of Eastern Asia. In addition, the undecoded Cretan Linear A is also believed to some to be a syllabic script, though it's not proven. Chinese characters, the cuneiform script used for Sumerian, Akkadian, and other languages, and the former Maya script are largely syllabic in nature, although based on logograms, they are therefore sometimes referred to as logosyllabic. English, along with many other Indo-European languages like German and Russian, allow for a complex syllable structure, making it cumbersome to write English words with a syllabary. A pure English syllabary would require over 10,000 separate glyphs for each possible syllable. I don't know if that makes sense or it makes it more confusing, but that's kind of what a syllabary is, just to give you an idea. So while Sequoyah was working on his syllabary, tribesmen began to wonder about him. They began to think that he was up to some sort of witchcraft. He would be outside in the shed for hours making markings on paper and what they thought were curses or spells. So they brought him before the chief and council in 1821. Sequoyah explained what he was doing. His conviction that a written language would greatly benefit his people in a rapidly changing world was not readily accepted by all Cherokees. Despite ridicule by friends and family members and accusations of insanity and practicing witchcraft, Sequoyah devoted the next decade of his life to creating talking leaves in his native tongue. By 1821, Sequoyah had isolated 86, later reduced to 85, syllables used in the spoken Cherokee language and assigned written symbols to each. Unlike the English writing system, where different letters can represent the same sound, for example, C and K can both represent the sound as in can and kill. Each letter in Sequoyah's syllabary represented a distinct sound. This brilliant innovation meant that any Cherokee who simply memorized it and the sounds and symbols could automatically read or write anything in the Cherokee language. Sequoyah's 6-year-old daughter, Ioka, was the first person to learn from it. Word spread in the town that they had created a new way to communicate, and they were charged and brought to trial by their own chief. Sequoyah and Ioka were separated, but still communicated by sending letters to one another. Eventually, the warriors presiding over their trial, along with the town, believed that Sequoyah had in fact created a new form of communication, and they all wanted him to teach it to them. He told the tribesmen about how he could possess a written language and how it would help them to communicate amongst other tribes as well as with other people in the United States. To test this written language, Sequoyah wrote down everything the chief said. After this, he gave his the paper with the writing on it to his daughter, who was not with him during the meeting. She was able to read back everything word for word of what the chief had said earlier. Upon noticing this, the Cherokee accepted the writing system and began using it. All Cherokee had adopted it by 1825. Sequoyah's discovery would go on to have a phenomenal impact. Sequoyah completed his syllabary in 1821, but it was not immediately accepted by the Cherokee nations, but it did quickly spread. In 1824, Sequoyah was awarded a medal for the Cherokee National Council. The same year, Sequoyah moved from Alabama to Arkansas. The tribal leaders recognized the value of Sequoyah's writing system. Within 6 months, more than 25% of the Cherokee Nation had learned how to read and write. In less than 3 years, the Cherokee were 3 times more literate in Sasaagi than their white neighbors were in English. 4 years later, he was one of the old settler delegates and went to Washington, D.C. to sign the treaty that exchanged the Cherokee land in Arkansas for Indian Territory, which is modern-day Oklahoma. In 1829, Sequoyah settled present-day Sallisaw, Oklahoma, with his wife and daughter. In 1838, the Cherokees from the southwest were moved to Indian Territory under Chief John Ross. After this, Sequoyah set out to unite the 16 other old settlers with the Ross Party because they had already established their own government. In 1839, Sequoyah and the 16 other old settlers and about 15 representatives of the Ross Party signed an act of union, and a new Cherokee constitution was created. Pressure from the federal government had already forced many Cherokees from their homelands, splitting the Cherokee Nation between east and west. Sequoyah had created a tool to keep its members united and informed. But it wouldn't be enough. Seeing the rising tensions between white settlers and his people in the East, which would culminate in the infamous Trail of Tears, Sequoyah moved to Oklahoma in 1829. Soon afterwards, Sequoyah went to Mexico and searched for Cherokees who had migrated there. He was hoping to spread his teachings of the syllabary and convince the migrated Cherokees to move to Indian Territory. In 1839, Sequoyah worked to help Cherokees flee from Texas, where they were being killed indiscriminately. 2 years later, he set out to find a lost band of Cherokee believed to have wandered far into the South and West and reunite them with the rest of the Cherokee Nation. Sadly, Sequoyah would not return from this journey, succumbing to illness in August 1843. Throughout his life, Sequoyah remained faithful to the traditions of the Cherokee people, never adopting white dress, religion, or other customs. He spoke Cherokee exclusively, though many scholars now suspect he did have some knowledge of English, but his focus was always the benefit and elevation of the Cherokee Nation. With the printing press made available, the Cherokee were able to print a bilingual newspaper called the Phoenix. Evangelical churches and missionaries soon took advantage, printing Bibles in the Cherokee language. In a short time, the Cherokee Nation became a literate people, able to keep up with the local and world news. While this brilliant linguistic achievement was rapidly recognized through the Western world, Samuel Austin Worcester, a missionary to the Cherokees from the Congregational Church, was instrumental in making the new Cherokee syllabary suitable for printing. Serving from 1825 to 1826 in the Brainerd Mission in Tennessee, Worcester was convinced that the use of native languages was a significant way to propagate the gospel. At his urging, a hand printing press and Cherokee syllabary characters and type were prepared in 1827 by the missionary board and shipped from Boston to Cherokee leaders in New Echota, Georgia. On February 21st, 1828, the inaugural issue of the first Native American newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, was printed in parallel columns in Cherokee and English. Using Sequoyah's syllabary, the Cherokee Nation and missionaries published newspapers, almanacs, government documents, religious tracts, hymn books, and the Christian Bible in the new written language. By 1843, the year of Sequoyah's death, more than 4 million pages of books, articles, and newspapers have been published in Cherokee. I just can't imagine one person creating a new written language. It's crazy. I never in a million years will be able to do that. But let's continue. While perhaps no other legacy can match the millions of printed pages preserving Cherokee history, culture, tradition, and sense of nation, many other honors have been bestowed upon Sequoyah for his remarkable achievement. After the nation accepted his syllabary in 1825, Sequoyah traveled to the Cherokee lands in the Arkansas Territory. There he set up a blacksmith shop and a salt works. He continued to teach the syllabary to anyone who wished. In 1828, Sequoyah journeyed to Washington, D.C. as part of a delegation to negotiate a treaty for land and planned Indian Territory. While in Washington, D.C., he sat for a formal portrait painted by Charles Bird King. He holds a copy of the syllabary in his left hand and is smoking a long-stem pipe. During his trip, he met representatives and other Native American tribes. Inspired by these meetings, he decided to create a syllabary for universal use among Native American tribes. Sequoyah began to journey in areas of present-day Arizona and New Mexico to meet with tribes there. In 1829, Sequoyah moved to a location on Big Skin Bayou, where he built Sequoyah's cabin that became his home for the rest of his life. It was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1965. The present-day city of Sallisaw, Oklahoma, developed near here. The house was operated by the Oklahoma Historical Society until it was purchased by the Cherokee Nation on November 9, 2016. In 1839, when the Cherokee were bitterly divided over the issue of removal of Indian territory, Sequoyah joined with Jesse Bushyhead to try to unite the Cherokee Nation. Sequoyah, representing the Western Cherokee, and Bushyhead, representing the Eastern Cherokee, made a joint plea at a tribal council meeting at Takatoka on June 20th, 1839. They succeeded in getting a voice vote to hold a new council of all Cherokees to resolve the reunification issues. This is when the Act of Union and a new Cherokee Constitution was created. Sequoyah dreamed of seeing reunification of the splintered Cherokee Nation. In the spring of 1842, he began a trip to locate other Cherokee bands who were believed to have fled to Mexico and attempted to persuade them to return to the Cherokee Nation, by then mostly residing in Indian territory. He was accompanied by his son Tisi, as well as other Cherokee men identified as Koteska, Nuwatana, Kahatata, Kawasiti, John Elijah, and the Worm. In December of 1842, Sequoyah, having loaded several pack horses with goods, visited in company with a number of Cherokees, the Comanche Indians. After remaining with them for some time, he made his way with the son and 2 or 3 more other Cherokees into northern Mexico towards Chihuahua, and engaged while teaching the Mexicans in his native language. Sometime between 1843 and 1845, he died due to an estimated respiratory infection during a trip to San Fernando de Rosas in Coahuila, Mexico. A letter written in 1845 by accompanying Cherokee stated that he had died in 1843. The village of San Fernando de Rosas was later renamed as Zaragoza. In 1938, the Cherokee Nation principal chief, J.B. Milam, funded an expedition to find Sequoyah's grave in Mexico. A party of Cherokee and non-Cherokee scholars embarked from Eagle Pass, Texas in January 1939. They found a gravesite near a freshwater spring in Coahuila, Mexico, but could not conclusively determine the gravesite was that of Sequoyah. In 2011, the Muskogee Phoenix published an article relating a discovery in 1903 of a gravesite in the Wichita Mountains by Hayes and Fancher, which they believed was Sequoyah's. The 2 men said the site was in a cave and contained a human skeleton with 1 leg shorter than the other, a long stem pipe, 2 silver medals, a flintlock rifle, and an axe. However, the site was far north of the Mexican border. So that's my story on Sequoyah, who revolutionized the way the Cherokee people communicated. His story is fascinating one, I think. Like I said, I feel like we should learn more about it in school, but there's so much we don't learn in school. This podcast is educating me on some things, and I hope in part I am educating you all too. As always, thanks for listening. If you haven't followed me on social media under Poison Appalachia, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Lemonade. Check out my website at poisonappalachia.com, and if you can, please like, rate, and share me on whatever podcast platform you listen to. Thanks, y'all.